Today we're going to continue to look at solving quadratics. We've looked at graphing, which gives us a nice visual picture. We looked at factoring, which often works but doesn't always work. So now we're going to explore an option that will always work, and that's solving quadratic equations by completing the square. So first of all, we're going to kind of lead up to the whole idea of completing the square. So we're going to go through some problems to kind of help you see solving this. Now, could this one here be done by solving by factoring, where you subtract the 49 from both sides, and then you'd have differences of squares, and you could solve it? Yes. But it is possible that you could solve it by just trying to get the squared term on one side by itself. So that means you could go ahead and divide both sides by 16. So then you get x squared equaling this fraction. Well, then you'd have to undo your squaring to get x by itself, so you'd have to take the square root of both sides. Remember, when you apply a square root to both sides, it's a plus or minus. So you take the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom, and we get our answer of plus or minus 7/4. So see if you can try this one. Once again, you want to try to get the squared part, the part that's here in the parentheses by itself. So you have to get rid of that 9. So divide both sides by the 9. So then you have your squared part by itself. Then you have to undo the squaring. To undo the squaring, you take the square root of both sides, square root of the left side, square root of the right side. Oh, we got the square root of a fraction over here. So you'd have to take the square root of the top over the square root of the bottom. Square root of the top is root 7. Square root of the 9 on the bottom is over 3. So then we just have to get x by itself by adding 1 to both sides. So we'd have 1 plus or minus r squared of 7 over 3. We also want to take a look at our square root property. Now, this is going to be helpful when we get to completing the square. For the most part, it's going to be set equal to a nice perfect square. We're going to just try to factor the left-hand side. You could do your AC factoring on the left-hand side. When you do that, you end up getting two parentheses that are the same. Well, two parentheses are the same. A shorthand way to write that is by just writing it as 1 parenthesis squared. Now it's just like the last couple problems. So we can undo the squaring by taking the square root of both sides, which we know plus or minus square root of 64 is plus or minus 8. Then we get x by itself. We get x equals negative 7 plus or minus 8. Now, since these are both nice, normal, neat numbers, we could actually break it apart and work out negative 7 plus 8 and negative 7 minus 8. Negative 7 minus 8, we get negative 15. Negative 7 plus 8, we get 1. So these are the two answers. Now, we're going to come back to this one here in just a bit. But I want you to try this one on your own first. So factor the left side into two identical parentheses. So you could write it as 1 parenthesis all squared. You have something squared equaling a number. Take your square root of both sides. Remember, the square root of 8 simplifies because that's a 4 times a 2. So we really get the square root of that 4, which is 2. So we get plus or minus 2 root 2. Then we can go ahead and get rid of this to finish solving it for x by adding a 2 to both sides. And then we just get x equals this 2 plus or minus our 2 root 2. Now, when we're looking at this square root property, it's going to be helpful to make note of a couple of patterns. How does this, whoops, sorry about that. How does this number here and this number here relate to each other? Well, this is a 7 squared. Where does 7 show up here? Well, it's half of that. Does that work here? If I take half of this number here, that's a 2 or negative 2. And if I square that, do I get this 4? Yes. That's what we need to be paying attention to when we're trying to complete the square. That this number here, if we take half of it and square it, always gives us this number here.